Hello and welcome to Outburst. I'm Glen McInnis. This week we're coming to you from Smiths Falls, Ontario, home of Cannabis Inc., the world's largest publicly traded pot producer. People in this small town know full well the promise and politics legal cannabis brings with it.
We've come a long way in property values, in business, and in the number of people that is employed. You know, they started with only a handful of people, 30 or 40, and now are projected to have 1,200 employees by this fall.
The problem with cannabis is we have a lot of societal problems as it is with drunk driving and alcoholism without adding cannabis to the equation.
It's been so economically depressed for so long that it's going to take a while for the full effect to, but you can start to see it.
It's actually getting to a point where finding employees for the other businesses in this town is getting to be a bit of an issue. I've lost a couple of my employees to tweed as well. It's hard to say no, they provide very good employment.
We'll have more from Smiths Falls later, but now it's your turn.
How will cannabis legalization change Canada?
Honestly, I think it'll make the streets safer because it'll be more controlled. So when people know that they're getting it from like a dispensary, then it's not going to be laced with something, because that's been a problem, in my opinion.
Madam?
Definitely the same idea is that it's safer, it's way more controlled, and people can get what's good for them, and it's become more of a medication.
You know, there is a whole underground economy right now and a whole kind of underground culture that exists around marijuana that will be allowed to come to the surface. My hope would be that some of that culture gets recognized and affirmed rather than just corporatized.
I think it's a really interesting international relations question, because the United States border has said that they're still going to persecute people, but if it's legalized everywhere, it's just going to be a case of further discrimination against people of color and people who are typically associated with marijuana crimes. Also, what is Canada doing to take everybody who has been legally penalized with marijuana crimes and amend that? Because there's a really big disparity between like people of color and young men, and in particular young men of color getting accused of these crimes. But how are we going to help them face the reality that like young white girls usually don't get associated with weed crimes, stuff like that? So I think there's a lot of layers of like justice we have to go through before we can get to like the social causes and the social implications. But that's me.
Maybe for the better, maybe not. I mean, everyone smokes it anyway to begin with, mostly, especially in Quebec. So I don't think it will make that much of a difference. It's more a safety hazard now, I think, because like people will be more relaxed about it and maybe go out while high and, I don't know, try to drive while high, and they shouldn't do that.
I think it depends on the generation, really, that you grew up in. Like, I'm 22, going on 23, so for someone like me, it doesn't really surprise me. It doesn't really feel like much is going to change, because everyone around me, or most people anyway, like, are involved with it or affiliated with it, so it seems pretty normal already. But I think if you're someone perhaps in the generation from my parents or before that, it might be a little bit more shocking, or it might feel a little bit more intimidating or different. So I think it really depends on the generation you're in.
Well, it's definitely going to change Canada, but I don't think it'll necessarily change the country, I guess. It's just a different law, and I mean, people are already smoking marijuana now anyways and using marijuana products, so I don't think it'll necessarily change anything.
I think in some ways it'll change Canada for the better. I think people who need access to it for medicinal reasons, I think that's a really positive step, very forward thinking.
For sure it will have an impact on the health of the people in the long term. So I don't have an advice if it's the right path or not, but for sure it will have an impact. It will have an impact, for a good impact for the economy too, because it will generate taxes for the country. So in a sense it have a positive and negative impacts.
From my experience, when it was not legal, people were smoking. So I was walking and saw smell. Someone, okay, that's one is smoking marijuana. Maybe it would just be a bit more open those who didn't care will continue. Those who will be, I will not say ashamed, but will try to keep this more secret since it will be legal. They will be more open to show it.
Moi, je pense que ça va avoir des conséquences. Ça va avoir des conséquences. Je dirais même que ça va peut-être engorger encore plus le système judiciaire parce que, tu sais, il y en a pour qui ça leur fera pas puis que ça risque de causer beaucoup de problèmes au niveau sécurité publique qui va faire que ça va encore engorger nos palais de justice. Puis, d'après moi, je suis pas sûre que ça va être une bonne affaire.
This is a small town facing big changes on October 17th. And as this country prepares to legalize cannabis, I stopped by Canada's largest pot producer to find out how they're getting ready for what they hope will be a boom in tourism and in trades.
We started here in 2014, late 2013, with a handful of people, 4 or 5 people at the very beginning. And now we're past 800 employees, which is more than Hershey ever had in this facility. And our Canadian headcount is over 1,300 people. So we're a big national employer, and I think once retail is rolled out and once all of our construction projects are finished, that number will continue to increase.
From local people here in Smiths Falls, what's their reaction? Are they happy this is going on?
Yeah.
Do you have some people that are not so sure or don't agree?
I think here in Smiths Falls, we're just a good neighbor. Like we're a very integrated part of this community, from a charity perspective, from a giving perspective, but also a transparency perspective. Like we invite people in anytime they want to come and have a look. We have a visitor center that people can pop by and look at. That all helps with the destigmatization.
So you were born and raised in Smiths Falls?
Yes, I've lived here my entire life. My family's been here for 6 generations.
6 generations now. You'd be a good guy to speak on this about how cannabis has changed this town. What effects do you think it has?
It's had a large effect since we lost a lot of our industry, including the Ontario Hospital and the Hershey plant. It took a lot of disposable income out of our town. Having Tweed come back in and have those jobs come back into this town has now made it so a lot of people can now earn a living that they couldn't earn before.
It has brought a lot of new money into the area. I will say that. I still think it'll be 3 to 5 years before the entire impact is into it. Right now, it's been so economically depressed for so long that it's going to take a while for the full effect to, but you can start to see it.
Well, there's nothing wrong with boosting the economy, but I think there's many different ways of doing that. To me, the problem with cannabis is we have a lot of societal problems as it is with drunk driving and alcoholism without adding cannabis to the equation.
Some of the strains you can smell about 2 blocks away when they're smoking it. That might be the biggest thing that, as a driver, that when they get in, that we need the Febreze, but there are strains that you wouldn't even know that they were smoking it.
Do you think it's a good idea that Smiths Falls has embraced cannabis like it's doing now?
No.
Our economy is dramatically different today than where it was a few years ago, and it's exploding. I mean, we look at demand for real estate now. We look at the people who are moving into our community, and in some ways changing the culture and the outlook. And a lot of younger people who are moving here because of they're working at Tweed, or we're also getting a lot of attention on Smiths Falls. Like, so for years we were the place where people were leaving and people weren't moving to for the most part, other than some retirees.
I think 5 years ago you could have walked around on the street in Smiths Falls and found some balance of yay and nay, but now I think it's overwhelmingly positive for the community. But I think if you look at Smiths Falls as a model, it's a bright future.
I just want you to kind of explain to me how you produce the product, how it's grown, how it's shipped, all those things.
Sure thing. So I mean, it's a multi-stage production process. It starts with these mother plants, and then we take some clippings off of those to basically have a clone of that plant. And then it goes through a series of different rooms where there's lighting and temperature controls. And that whole process takes about 3 months until it's ready to be harvested. We're looking for the flower of the plant, not for the leaf that people associate with cannabis. That flower is then cut off, trimmed, dried, and then we cure it. Some of that is extracted, but a lot of it is just sold as the bud that people would see, and then it's shipped around. So as a medical business, we've been going directly to consumers. They order online, we ship it directly to their house, Now, as we're getting ramped up for the recreational market, we're more of a wholesaler.
Right now, we're in an area of the facility called the Vault, and this is home to roughly 40 million grams of marijuana, and much of this will be shipped across the country for both recreational and medical use. Now, recently, the Canadian Medical Association suggested that medical marijuana be phased out because of the lack of regulatory oversight and clinical research on the drug. But despite that, Health Canada says the program will move forward and has even made companies like Shoppers Drug Mart licensed producers. So now, it's your turn.
Should medical marijuana be phased out after legalization?
I mean, if you're on it already for medicinal, and I guess it's stronger, maybe if it's stronger, then it shouldn't be phased out, because if it's for medical reasons, that's like asking if, like, oh, should we ban Advil after, I don't know, more powerful Advil comes out or something?
I think that we need to lean into the medical implications of marijuana. If there are things that we can do to help people, now like the stigma is gone. I know that there are going to be a whole generation of people who just like refuse to look at it. They're going to say it's awful because they've been conditioned to say this is awful, this is bad. So we do need the support from like universities doing research, medical studies, people leaning into this. And now that it's legal, maybe we can get rid of the stigma in a medical condition. Because recreational versus medicinal marijuana are going to be two completely different things, because like a doctor will know, how do you prescribe this? How much do you take? What do you do? And I'm honestly not that familiar, but I do know that there's like different products that you can do. And so I'm very curious to see how legalization is going to make it more accessible for people medicinally, because the stigma isn't as attached to it.
I'd say with, I guess, the availability of non-medical marijuana, the medicalization of it isn't really necessary. But I don't know.
Sir, what do you think?
Definitely not. Definitely not, because I think it's important and medical. That's where it all started, really. It was because of the medical that got the recreational going and everything else. But there's a real need for it.
That's a good question. I mean, it would be, I think, maybe the difference between over-the-counter painkiller versus a prescribed painkiller, perhaps, and perhaps medical programs that support prescriptions will benefit from it or be able to use it, even if it's available, for example, over-the-counter or whatever the structure is for the legalization strategy that's been proposed. Yeah.
No, it should not be. Medical marijuana should still be kept as is, so that the way it should be used as medicinal, it has a medicinal value. It should be informed by the right doctors, rather than people having the direct access. That's wrong. So it should be through the doctor. Yeah.
I think that either way, when people get marijuana, it would be used for recreational use or medical use. So either way, people are going to be smoking weed. There's not much of a difference, in my opinion, like if it's for arthritis pain or if it's not for it. I think either way, people are going to get what they want.
I mean, I agree in the same sense. I think that when it's legalized, it will be easier. Let's say you need it for medical reasons, then you might not have to get the prescription. So I can see how it being phased out would maybe make sense. But then either way, so I don't know. I say no.
The fact that it can be purchased at NSLC should maybe stop other purchasing of it through other people.
Yeah, I think some people might feel more comfortable still buying it, feeling like it's specifically for medical use. So I think having the option's never a bad idea, certainly.
No, if it's actually required for medical, because of the tax relief that they would get on their returns, right? But I'm not 100% sure that most people that have the medical prescription actually have it for legitimate medical reasons, right?
In what year was cannabis criminalized in Canada?
1950. I'm gonna say 1980.
2018.
No, that's criminalized. When did?
Oh, criminalized. Oh, I thought you meant legalized. Oh.
1982.
I'm going to go for 75.
1928.
1961.
Your choices are
1867, 1923, 1941. 1867, 1923, 1941.
23.
1923. 1941.
1923. 1941.
1867.
1923.
1941.
It's 1923. Cannabis was first criminalized in 1923 as part of the Act to prohibit the improper use of opium and other drugs. Historians have no record of the parliamentary debate of this bill and the reasons why the government chose to criminalize cannabis, but some think it was related to Canada's participation in the League of Nations. Many Canadians have never even heard of cannabis in the 1920s, and the first records of its seizure by police didn't happen until 1932. Possession offenses, either charges or convictions, only began in 1937. And only 270 possessions offenses were reported from 1923 to 1965. In 1969, Canada began to look into using cannabis for medical use. In 1977, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau told students, if you have a joint and you're smoking it for your private pleasure, you shouldn't be hassled. Medical marijuana laws in Canada were added in 2001 to allow Canadians with serious illnesses to obtain legal access to cannabis. Royal assent was given to the Cannabis Act in 2018, which made Canada the second country in the world to nationally legalize recreational cannabis.
Now, the rules around how and where cannabis can be sold in Ontario has changed with a new provincial government. Here in Smiths Falls, Canada's largest pot producer can't sell their product in stores yet. But the Ontario provincial government has proposed that marijuana smoking be allowed in public places, the same as cigarettes. In Calgary, it's a slightly different story. Smoking is allowed on private property or in designated areas, and rental units and condos can also ban tenants from using.
Should Canadians be able to consume cannabis in public spaces?
Maybe designated public places, not just anywhere they want. Same as smoking, you know, it's impolite to smoke in front of people and blow your smoke in their faces, I guess.
Yes, but I mean, like, depend the area, kind of thing. Yeah, like in public, but not like anywhere, just in parks or
outside the city, in some country place where no burning materials will be affected. So some quiet little stone village.
But not in public.
No.
I don't think it's something that we should be exposing to young children. Like, it's fine if you're an adult and you're making your own decisions, but even with like alcohol, it's designated to like bars and places that have regulations. So
I think it should follow the same rules as cigarette smoking. Definitely on patios or around bars potentially, but in public places such as around here, probably not.
Absolutely not. I'm very strong on that. I'm not happy about this whole legalization of marijuana thing. And if people can't smoke regular cigarettes in public because of the secondhand smoke, why should we be subjected to marijuana smoke?
No, because as a father, and I don't think so. There are children that are around, just like alcohol. There should be designated areas. Should it be limited to the small amount that they're proposing? I don't think so. There should be designated areas inside and outside. That should be for weed smoking.
In public places, I guess it makes no difference to me, but sure. I guess if they're going to do the same laws as with alcohol, where you can't drink in public, then they probably should do the same with the marijuana. But again, people being intoxicated in public on alcohol and being intoxicated on marijuana is a little bit different. So personally, if it doesn't offend someone else, I don't see an issue with it.
In public places, I don't think so. Because it could bother other people, just like regular smoke. Maybe public places where no one can maybe smell or be affected by the smoke.
Okay.
Maybe designated areas for smokers.
I'd have to say no on that, even in designated smoking areas. And I'm very pro marijuana, cannabis. I mean, all my life I thought it should have been legalized. But taking it outside in public like that, no, because it's an intoxicant.
Where else are you going to have it? I mean, besides home, you know, you're going to want to be walking down the road on a sunny day, having a joint, or in the park. So, I believe you should have it in public, absolutely.
While the federal government has been taking the lead on cannabis legalization, some Indigenous communities have other plans. While our Constitution allows Indigenous communities to self-govern, some want cannabis gone altogether, while others are seeing a lucrative business opportunity emerge. Senators have been pressing for answers.
All I want is a simple answer.
On who can make the rules when it comes to recreational cannabis.
The Indian Act communities are federal jurisdiction. Now, will the provinces be able to come in there and say, no, you cannot have dispensaries? Yes or no?
Yeah, no, I don't touch it.
So now, it's your turn.
How much influence should Indigenous governments have on cannabis rules?
I would say as a Calgarian, I think they should have as much voice as every other citizen. On the reserves, I think they should have a lot more control in partnership with the provincial government. But I think they should have a voice because they're Canadians just like us.
They have an opinion, just like I have an opinion, or anybody else has an opinion.
Okay.
They're entitled to an opinion, but they're not the government.
Well, I think that their reserves are different rules in general for plenty of recreational things.
They're the first people on these lands, so I believe they should be getting some portion of tax. As far as like anything, there shouldn't be a whole lot of pull with inside of municipalities, but they should be getting a tax kickback.
If they have a say, if there's some sort of legality, then yeah, they should have all kinds of say on it. But I'm not aware of any control that they might have over that.
They should have a ton of influence. So if you look at the Cannabis Act federally, there was no mention of First Nations. So how can that be when you're looking at a population largely across Canada that is really living in third world conditions, and that we're not going to be invited and be considered for this economic development opportunity. So First Nations have the right, the sovereign right to write rules, the right of Cannabis Act, their own act, to govern in their lands the production and sale. I'm David Sharp. I'm the CEO of Bridging Finance Inc., and I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte here in Ontario. And I'm a business person, but my heart is with the nations on economic development. This is how we become equal citizens, not citizens minus in Canada. And it is competing with the mainstream and not having handouts, saying, no, we're going to take these jobs. We are as good employees and employers as Bay Street and Wall Street. So that's when the light bulb went off, saying, we can't miss this. And to date, when you look at Bridging Finance, we've lent out with the First Nations $100 million to build cultivation facilities and now retail. And we're committed and we're in for the long haul as partners. So really, these opportunities, these economic opportunities only come every once in a while. So if you don't seize the day, it will just pass you by so quickly. So it's going from cultivation, so production facility in the community, in the First Nations community. And that means shovel in the ground, grading, constructing cultivation facilities, production facilities. And so we're doing that. We have one in Winnipeg that is complete. Plants are there and we're producing. We have one in Halifax, Nova Scotia as well. And we're going to build others. So they're ready to go with licensing as well on the cultivation side. And then what we're going to do is, depending, as you know, that retail distribution of cannabis is a provincial jurisdictional matter. So we're going to try to get licenses. And if we can't get licenses, we're going to exercise, or the First Nation will, their sovereign right to earn a living. And that means selling on reserve to people who are consumers on and off the reserve. And it's a metaphor, but this is the new buffalo. Buffalo used to drive our economy on the prairies and the plains. Well, this is the new buffalo. This is something that we can use and we can sell legally or exercise our sovereign right. And we can sell that. And you know it's going to make lots of money for the community, but it's going to go back into the community for programming, for training, for jobs, for healthcare. All those things that we need in our communities and clean drinking water. So we want to drive this, and this is economic reconciliation. And trust me when I say that we've had to kick down these doors. It hasn't been that we've been invited to the party. We've kicked down the doors and insisted on economic reconciliation and using cannabis as a catalyst.
Thanks for watching this episode of Outburst. You can find us on social media or send us an email at outburst@cpac.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Here's a little bit of what you'll see next week.
Getting involved in politics isn't just about running, it's also about volunteering and getting involved in community issues.
What are we doing as a millennial, as young people who are able to create things for ourselves that are in line with our passions and burdens?
I think what they're doing is horrible and that they shouldn't go back to the sex ed curriculum in 1998, and I think that they should just leave it as it was because it was good.
People's voices need to be heard, and so if they're not being represented by their elected politicians, then they need to find a way to do that.
You deserve the right to say things that aren't suppressed by your government.
If the protest is blocking roads, if the protest is stopping public's life, that's not a protest. That's just a chaos, or that's a hooligan's activity.
I don't care about the size of City Council. That isn't the issue for me. The issue is you don't meddle in elections. Once the election's called, it's a complete travesty.
We are the future leaders of tomorrow. We're the ones who are going to face the consequences of the policies that are being set today.